The stick felt wrong in his hands. Too light, too responsive, like the aircraft wanted to climb when every instinct screamed at him to stay low. 50 feet below, the Pacific Ocean moved in dark swells, close enough that Lieutenant James Holloway could see individual whitecaps through the oil-streaked windscreen of his F4U Corsair. Above him, 11 Japanese Zeros circled like sharks sensing blood. His radio crackled with static and distant voices calling targets, calling brakes, calling for help that would never come. His fuel gauge showed a quarter tank. Maybe 20 minutes of flight time. Maybe less. The nearest friendly airstrip was 43 minutes away. The math was simple and brutal. He was already dead, except he had done this before. Not here, not in combat, but in another life. Over Kansas wheat fields at dawn, flying machines that should have killed him 100 times. His instructor's voice echoed across the years. At 10 feet, there's no such thing as a mistake, only physics and consequence. Holloway pushed the stick forward. The Corsair dropped lower. 40 feet, 30, 25. The ocean rushed up to meet him like a concrete wall, moving at 200 miles per hour. One of the Zeros dove. Holloway saw in his peripheral vision a dark shape cutting through the sky, committing to an angle of attack that assumed he would climb. That assumed he would follow the rules. He didn't climb. He banked hard left, the wingtip nearly kissing foam, and the Zero screamed past overhead, its pilot hauling back on the stick to avoid plowing into the sea. In the ready room at Torquay Airstrip, they had called him the farmer. They said it with barely concealed contempt. A crop duster playing at war. A man too slow, too cautious, too careful for fighter combat. They weren't laughing now, because over the next 18 minutes, Lieutenant James Holloway would do something no American pilot had ever attempted in the Pacific theater. He would turn the ocean into a weapon. He would fly at altitudes where a single mistake meant instant death. And he would prove that sometimes the best defense is to go exactly where the enemy believes you cannot survive. This is the story of how a Kansas farm boy rewrote the rules of aerial combat with a tactic so dangerous, so counterintuitive, that even his own commanders thought he was insane. Until it worked. February 1944. The Solomon Islands. The sky above Rabaul Harbor belongs to the dead and the dying. It smells of burning aviation fuel, cordite, and the sharp salt tang of ocean spray mixed with blood. At 12,000 feet, the cockpit of an F4U Corsair is a cramped metal coffin that vibrates with a throb of 18 cylinders turning a 13-foot propeller. The instrument panel glows with a sickly luminescence. The control stick trembles under gloved hands that are never quite steady anymore. Below, the Pacific stretches endless and utterly indifferent, swallowing wreckage without ceremony or memory. This is Marine Fighter Squadron VMF 124, operating from a muddy slash of runway carved into the jungle of Bougainville. They fly long-range escort missions deep into Japanese-held territory, where the odds are calculated with the cold precision of an actuarial table. Every sortie costs fuel, machines, and men. Replacements arrive weekly, young and pale and frightened, smelling of stateside soap and innocence. Some last 5 missions. Some last 1. The mathematics are merciless. Japanese A6M Zeros outnumber Marine fighters 3-1 in most engagements. The Zero climbs faster, turns tighter at combat speeds, and is flown by pilots with years of combat experience carved into muscle memory and instinct. Men who learned to kill over China, the Philippines, through 2 years of Pacific combat that refined their skills the way a whetstone sharpens a blade. American doctrine is clear, refined through blood and failure. Maintain altitude. Use speed in diving attacks. Exploit the Corsair's superior high-speed handling and heavy armament. Never, under any circumstances, turn with a Zero in a low-speed fight. The rules are written in blood. They work when pilots follow them. Survival rates improve. Deviation means death. But doctrine assumes you have choices. It assumes you can pick when and where to engage, that you can break contact when overwhelmed, that you can trade altitude for speed and escape into friendly skies. Over Rabaul in early 1944, Marine pilots rarely have that luxury. They fly escort for lumbering SBD Dauntless dive bombers, for photo reconnaissance birds flying straight, and level over anti-aircraft batteries for supply runs that cannot deviate from their flight plans. They cannot abandon their charges. When Zeros bounce them from above, they absorb the first attack and pray to survive long enough to break contact. Most do not. The sound is what survivors remember. The roar of the Pratt & Whitney R 2800 radial engine at combat power. A sound felt in the chest as much as heard. The mechanical rattle of gun cameras cycling. The crackle and hiss of radio chatter as pilots call out enemy positions in clipped, urgent voices. Bandits high, 3 o'clock. Break left, break left. I'm hit, I'm hit. Then the scream of diving fighters, a rising Doppler shriek of engine noise and wind. The hammering staccato of 20 millimeters cannon fire punching through aluminum skin. The wet, meaty sound of rounds hitting flesh. And sometimes the terrible silence when an engine quits or a wing folds and a Corsair begins its long, spinning tumble toward the sea. Into this crucible flies a pilot the squadron calls the farmer. He does not look like a warrior. Tall and lean, with sun-creased eyes that squint even in shadow, hands that remember gripping a tractor steering wheel before they ever touch the control stick. A graduate of nowhere important, with a background in agriculture and crop dusting that makes the academy boys smirk behind their hands. He speaks in slow, measured sentences, as if checking each word for structural integrity before releasing it. His squadron mates find him frustrating. He reads after action, reports obsessively. He asks questions that seem naive or worse, insubordinate. He questions tactics that have been handed down from commanders who survived Guadalcanal and Midway. His commanding officer, Captain Richard Stafford, told him once, "Holloway, doctrine exists for a reason. Pilots who deviate die." Holloway had nodded, filed the comment away, and kept thinking, because he had seen the pattern repeating mission after mission. He had watched Zeros position themselves high and ahead, rolling inverted dive through American formations at closing speeds exceeding 500 miles per hour. He had seen Corsairs try to climb to meet them, bleeding speed, becoming easy targets. He had seen wingmen break formation to chase Zeros into turning fights they could not win. He had watched good pilots die, following doctrine. And something in his mind, something carved from 300 hours of flying 10 feet above Kansas wheat fields, kept whispering that there had to be another way. James Edward Holloway was born in Russell County, Kansas in 1918, the second son of wheat farmers who measure their wealth in acres and rainfall. His childhood was dust storms and endless horizons, the constant hum of John Deere tractors and the smell of turned earth after spring plowing. His father, Thomas Holloway, ran 200 acres of wheat and corn with the quiet competence of a man who understood that nature gave nothing for free. His mother, Ruth, kept the books and raised 4 children with the firm belief that education and hard work could overcome any obstacle. Holloway grew up watching people solve complex problems with limited resources and no backup plan. When a tractor broke down during harvest, you fixed it with wire and ingenuity because the grain wouldn't wait. When drought came, you planted different crops or watched your family starve. There was no manual for survival, only adaptation and consequence. He learned to fly at 16, not through any official channel, but through a crop dusting operation run by a man named Frank Morrison outside of Hays, Kansas. Morrison was a former barnstormer, a man with missing teeth and a whiskey-roughened voice who survived the 1920s flying circuit by being better than everyone else and luckier than he had any right to be. He operated 3 beaten Stearman biplanes and employed a rotating cast of pilots who came seeking easy money and left in pine boxes or with enough sense to quit. Holloway showed up one morning in June 1934, 16 years old and sunbrowned, asking for work. Morrison looked him up and down and laughed. "I need someone to mix chemicals and fuel aircraft. 25 cents an hour. You're not flying anything." Holloway met his eyes. "Teach me to fly instead." Morrison stopped laughing. There was something in the boy's voice. Not arrogance, not bravado, just a flat statement of intent. "You'll kill yourself." "Maybe, but I'd rather try than spend my life mixing chemicals." Morrison studied him for a long moment, then spat tobacco juice into the dirt. "Be here at 5 tomorrow morning. If you're late, don't come back. The education that followed was brutal and practical. No textbooks, no ground school, no theory about lift and drag, and adverse yaw. Just Morrison yelling instructions from the ground as Holloway wrestled a beaten steerman through low-altitude runs over cornfields, learning by doing, learning by surviving. Crop dusting taught physics that no classroom could replicate. Flying 10 feet off the ground at 90 miles per hour, reading terrain through peripheral vision, anticipating wind shifts by watching dust patterns and the way wheat stalks bent, turning hard at the field edge without stalling or clipping a wing on a fence post, landing on dirt roads and crosswinds that would ground sensible pilots. Morrison's rules were simple and absolute. Fly low, fly smooth, never panic. If you climb when you should turn, you die. If you freeze when you should react, you die. If you hesitate, you die. Holloway learned fast because the alternative was death. The work was dangerous beyond reason. Pilots died every season, striking power lines they never saw, misjudging clearance over tree lines, stalling in tight turns with no altitude to recover. Morrison lost 2 pilots in Holloway's first summer. Both were experienced men, veterans of years of agricultural flying. Both made single mistakes. Holloway attended their funerals and learned that at 10 feet, there was no margin for error, no second chances, only physics and consequence. By 1937, Holloway had logged over 300 hours, all of it below 100 feet. He could thread a steerman between a barn and a silo with inches to spare. He could roll inverted to check a field layout. He could land on a county road in a 20-knot crosswind and make it look routine. Morrison told him once, after a particularly difficult day, "You're the best natural pilot I've ever trained, but you're too careful for the military. They want aggression. You've got patience." Holloway thought about that comment often in the years that followed. When he tried to enlist in naval aviation in 1938, the recruiter took one look at his application and laughed until tears ran down his face. No college degree, no military experience, background in agriculture. The recruiter shook his head. "Son, the Navy wants academy graduates and engineering students, not farm boys who smell like pesticide and cow shit." Holloway tried again in 1939. Rejected. He tried the Army Air Corps. Rejected for age and educational deficiency. Frustrated but not defeated, he returned to Kansas and kept flying crop dusters, saving money, waiting for an opportunity that seemed increasingly unlikely to arrive. Then December 7th, 1941 happened. Pearl Harbor changed everything overnight. Enlistment standards dropped so fast it made heads spin. The military needed pilots desperately, needed them immediately, needed them in numbers that made peacetime recruiting standards laughable. Holloway walked into a Marine Corps recruiting office in Topeka on December 10th, 3 days after the attack. He passed the physical. He passed the aptitude test. He signed the papers and shipped out to Naval Air Station Pensacola for flight training in January 1942. He was 23 years old, older than most cadets, and he carried himself with the quiet confidence of someone who had already survived 1,000 near crashes at treetop level. Flight training at Pensacola exposed the fundamental divide between Holloway and his fellow cadets. Most were college boys, quick with mathematics and navigation theory, comfortable with military discipline and hierarchical command structures. They adapted easily to the regimented training, the classroom instruction, the emphasis on formation flying and tactical doctrine. Holloway was none of these things. He struggled with classroom instruction, finding it abstract and disconnected from the physical reality of flight. He questioned procedures that seemed inefficient. He flew with a smoothness that instructors noted in their evaluations but could not quite explain. His landings were perfect. His aerobatics were competent. But his approach to combat maneuvers felt wrong to his instructors. Too slow, too cautious, too much like a man conserving fuel over endless wheat fields rather than a fighter pilot seeking to close with and destroy the enemy. One instructor wrote in his evaluation, "Shows excellent aircraft control, but lacks aggressive instinct required for fighter operations. Recommend reassignment to transport or patrol duty." Holloway ignored the recommendation. He kept flying. He graduated in the middle of his class, neither celebrated nor dismissed, and received orders to Marine Corps Air Station Cherry Point in North Carolina for advanced fighter training. Cherry Point introduced him to the F4U Corsair. The Corsair was a monster, a massive, complex aircraft powered by a Pratt & Whitney R 2800 double Wasp engine that produced over 2,000 horsepower. It was fast, brutally fast, with a top speed exceeding 400 miles per hour. It was powerful and unforgiving. It also had a tendency to stall in tight turns. The long nose blocked forward visibility during landing approaches. The narrow-track landing gear was prone to collapse. Early production models killed more Marines in training accidents than in combat. Holloway loved it immediately. The Corsair reminded him of the overloaded crop dusters he had flown, temperamental machines that required constant attention and smooth hands. He learned its quirks quickly. The way it wanted a torque left on takeoff. The way it wallowed at low speeds. The way it accelerated like a rocket in a dive. He flew it the way Morrison had taught him. Low and precise, never fighting the aircraft, always working with it. His squadron mates at Cherry Point called him the farmer. Some meant it as mockery. Others said it with grudging respect. He did not drink heavily or chase thrills. He studied maintenance manuals while others played cards. He asked crew chiefs about engine performance at different altitudes and fuel consumption rates. His peers respected his skill, but did not fully understand him. He was competent, calm, and oddly fearless in a way that seemed less like bravado and more like mathematical calculation. In November 1943, Holloway received orders to VMF 124, deploying to the South Pacific. He shipped out from San Diego in December, sailed to the Panama Canal, and arrived at Espiritu Santo in early January 1944. From there, he flew north to Torquina Airstrip on Bougainville, a muddy slash carved into the jungle, home to 2,000 Marines and a dozen barely functional Corsairs held together with salvage parts and the determination of ground crews who performed miracles with inadequate tools. His new squadron commander, Captain Richard Stafford, was a by-the-book officer who valued discipline and formation integrity above all else. He did not encourage freelancing or tactical innovation. When Holloway began asking technical questions during briefings about low-altitude tactics and terrain masking, Stafford shut him down immediately. Doctrine exists for a reason, Lieutenant. Pilots who deviate die. Dismissed. But Holloway kept thinking, because the numbers told a story that doctrine seemed unwilling to acknowledge. The crisis facing Marine fighter squadrons in early 1944 was not merely tactical. It was existential. F4U Corsairs were being shot down faster than replacements could arrive. The loss rate was unsustainable. Entire flights evaporated over Rabaul Harbor or the shipping lanes near Bougainville. Young pilots arrived green from stateside training and died before they learned to recognize the signs of an impending bounce. The enemy was simply better. Japanese A6M0 pilots were veterans blooded over China, the Philippines, and through 2 years of Pacific combat. They flew aircraft that could outturn, outclimb, and outmaneuver Corsair at speeds below 300 miles per hour. They hunted in coordinated pairs, exploiting altitude and energy with surgical precision. Marine doctrine acknowledged the disadvantage and prescribed clear countermeasures. Never turn with a zero. Use speed and altitude. Attack from above with a single high-speed pass. Disengage in a dive. Extend away using superior straight-line speed. The tactics work when conditions favor them. But escort missions to targets like Rabaul stripped away every advantage. The Corsairs arrived at maximum range. Fuel tanks already half empty, often jumped by Zeros diving from superior altitude with the sun at their backs. Doctrine said to extend in a dive and run for home. Reality said the bombers needed protection, and running meant abandoning them to slaughter. The mathematics were unforgiving. In January 1944 alone, VMF 124 lost 8 pilots in 4 weeks. Replacement pilots arrived with an average of 200 hours of flight time, trained stateside against cooperative targets and predictable scenarios. They lasted an average of 6 combat missions before being killed, wounded, or breaking down psychologically. The squadron operated in a state of constant attrition, rotating fresh faces into cockpits still warm from the last occupant. painting new names on ready room boards that would be erased within weeks. Intelligence summaries documented the problem in clinical, bureaucratic language. Enemy tactics favor vertical engagement from superior altitude. Our fighters lack positional advantage at point of contact. Recommendations: improved early warning systems, additional fuel capacity, enhanced formation discipline. None of the recommendations addressed the fundamental issue. When Zeros held altitude and chose the terms of engagement, Marines died. The pattern repeated with mechanical regularity. Holloway watched this unfold mission after mission. He flew escort to Rabaul, to Caving, to Buka. He saw Zeros position themselves ahead of bomber formations, roll inverted, and dive straight through with 20mm cannons firing. He saw Corsairs try to climb and meet them, bleeding airspeed, becoming targets. He saw wingmen break formation to chase Zeros into turning fights they could not win. He sketched diagrams in his notebook late at night, calculating angles and energy states, trying to understand the geometry of why doctrine kept failing. He began asking dangerous questions that made his squadron mates uncomfortable and his commanding officer angry. What if we stop trying to climb? What if we force them to fight at low altitude, where our weight advantage matters? His fellow pilots looked at him like he was insane. Low altitude meant no escape route. It meant flying into the ocean if you misjudged. It violated every principle of fighter combat taught at Pensacola and Cherry Point. Captain Stafford shut down the discussion during a mission briefing. In early February, we followed doctrine, Lieutenant, not half-baked theories from crop dusters. Dismissed. But Holloway could not shake a growing conviction that the Corsairs' advantages were being wasted by fighting at altitudes where the Zero excelled. The Corsair was heavier, with a more powerful engine and better high-speed handling. At low altitude, in thick air close to sea level, those advantages might matter. The denser air would give more lift, more control authority, more engine power. And Holloway had spent 300 hours flying 10 feet off the ground, learning to read terrain, to use ground effect, to maneuver in an environment where hesitation meant instant death. He had survived by doing what seemed impossible. He wondered if the same principles might apply over water. Then came February 12, 1944, the mission that would test everything. The briefing room at Torquina smelled of mildew, cigarette smoke, and the sharp tang of men sweating through their fear. Maps covered the walls showing Japanese positions, known anti-aircraft concentrations, and a long over-water route to Rabaul. Major William Grayson stood at the front with a wooden pointer, tapping locations on the chart with mechanical precision. Target is Rabaul Harbor. Bomber strike against shipping and dock facilities. 12 SPD Dauntless dive bombers. 6 Corsair escorts. Maximum range mission. Fuel will be critical. He paused to let that sink in. Maximum range meant no margin for error. No loitering. No extended combat. Expect heavy fighter opposition. Intelligence reports at least 30 Zeros base at Rabaul and Tobra airfields. They will intercept. Grayson's voice was flat, reciting facts everyone already knew. Standard tactics apply. Maintain altitude. Protect the bombers. Disengage if overwhelmed. Questions? Holloway raised his hand. What altitude will the bombers be flying? Grayson checked his notes. 14,000 feet on approach. Diving to 8,000 for bomb runs. And if we get bounced from above at 14,000? Grayson's expression tightened. You follow doctrine, Lieutenant. Extend away in a dive. Regroup. Re-engage if possible. His tone made it clear the discussion was over. Next question. There were no more questions. The pilots filed out to their aircraft, each man carrying the weight of what was coming. Holloway walked to his Corsair, tail number 57, parked in a sandbag revetment at the edge of the strip. Sergeant Bill Mackenzie, his crew chief, was finishing pre-flight checks. Mackenzie was a Scottish immigrant, short and stocky, with grease-stained hands and a skeptical disposition, honed through 3 months of keeping broken aircraft flying with salvage parts and improvisation. He looked up as Holloway approached. Fuel tanks topped off, sir. Guns loaded. 600 rounds per gun. Oil pressure running a hair high. But within limits. She'll fly. Holloway nodded, then hesitated. Mac, I need you to do something unusual. Mackenzie's eyes narrowed. How unusual? I need the gun sight adjusted. Lower the pipper 2 degrees. Mackenzie blinked. Sir, that'll throw off your aim at normal combat ranges. I know. Do it anyway. Mackenzie stared for a long moment, then shrugged. Your funeral, Lieutenant. He made the adjustment while Holloway completed his walk-around inspection. Then Holloway climbed into the cockpit. The seat was worn, molded to his body from weeks of use. The instruments were familiar. He strapped in, connected oxygen, checked controls with practice efficiency. The Pratt & Whitney engine coughed twice, caught, and settled into a rumbling idle that shook the airframe. Around him, other Corsairs were starting up, blue exhaust smoke drifting across the strip in the morning air. Captain Stafford's voice crackled over the radio. All flights, check in. One by one, the pilots responded. Holloway keyed his mic. 5-7, ready. The formation taxied to the runway, formed up, and took off into the gray morning sky. They climbed slowly, forming a loose escort around the lumbering dive bombers. The course was north-northwest, over open ocean toward Rabaul. Holloway settled into the rhythm of long-range flight, scanning instruments, watching the formation, conserving fuel with small throttle adjustments. The ocean stretched below, endless and gray. He had no way of knowing that in less than an hour he would be alone over enemy territory with choice no doctrine had prepared him for. The Zeros appeared 23 minutes from the target. Holloway saw them first, small specks high and ahead, catching sunlight like silverfish breaking the surface of a dark sea. He keyed his mic. Bandits, 12 o'clock high. Angels, 20. Captain Stafford's voice came back clipped and tense. All flights maintain formation. Prepare to engage. The Zeros climbed higher, positioning themselves with the patience of experienced predators. This was textbook Japanese tactics. Get above, get fast, dive through, and scatter the formation. The Marine Corsairs tightened up, trying to present overlapping fields of fire. The bombers droned on, committed to their attack run, unable to deviate. Then the Zeros rolled inverted and dove. 11 aircraft screaming down at over 500 miles per hour, 20mm cannons already firing, tracers arcing through the sky like lines of deadly light. The sky erupted into chaos. Stafford called a break. Red flight, brake right. Blue flight, brake left. Holloway broke hard right. Felt the G-forces crush him into his seat, vision narrowing at the edges. A Zero flashed past so close he could see the pilot's face, see the red rising sun on the fuselage. He pulled hard, trying to track, but the Zero was already climbing away, untouchable, using the energy from its dive to zoom back to altitude. Another Zero came in from his 7 o'clock. Holloway snap-rolled, dove, extended. The Zero followed, matching his dive. His wingman, Lieutenant Marcus Chun, called out over the radio. 5-7, you got one on your tail. I see him, Holloway replied, pushing the throttle to the firewall. The Corsair accelerated, but the Zero stayed with him. They were already at 8,000 feet and dropping fast. Doctrine said to extend in a dive, use superior straight-line speed to separate, then zoom climb back to altitude. Holloway looked at his fuel gauge. Half tanks. Not enough to climb and fight. Not enough to run home. He made a decision that defied every instinct, every hour of training, every page of doctrine. He pushed the stick forward and kept diving. 6,000 feet. 4,000. 2,000. The ocean surface rushed up, gray and endless, detail resolving from a flat expanse into individual swells and whitecaps. The Zero pilot hesitated, uncertain. American fighters did not dive to the deck. They climbed. They used altitude as life insurance. Holloway leveled off at 50 feet above the waves. The Corsair shuddered as it entered ground effect, the thick air cushioning the aircraft, changing its flight characteristics. He throttled back slightly, reduced speed to 200 miles per hour. The Zero, still in a dive, overshot and had to pull up hard to avoid plowing into the ocean. Holloway saw it flash overhead, the pilot fighting for control, losing precious energy in the pull-up. 2 more Zeros dove on him from different angles. Holloway did something no American pilot had ever attempted in the Pacific theater. He flew the Corsair like a crop duster. At 50 feet above the Pacific Ocean, the rules of aerial combat cease to exist. There is no altitude to trade for speed, no room to dive away from a threat, no margin for error. A single moment of inattention, one gust of wind misjudged, one wave crest miscalculated, means instant death. Holloway's world compressed to a tunnel of sensory input processed at the speed of instinct. The gray swells rolling below, the salt spray coating his windscreen, the roar of his engine at combat power, the stick vibrating in his hands. Above him, 11 Japanese Zeros circled like predators, confused by prey that refused to behave according to pattern. Holloway jinked hard left, then right, skimming wave tops, using the ocean swells as terrain the way he had used wheat fields in Kansas. The Zeros tried to follow, but at 50 feet their advantage evaporated. They lost the sight picture. The water below confused their depth perception. They could not set up clean deflection shots without risking a water impact that would kill them instantly. They pulled up, repositioned, tried again. Holloway kept moving. Violent banks, sudden climbs of 100 feet, then drops back to wave level. He was reading the ocean the way he had read terrain, anticipating changes, reacting before conscious thought, never holding a steady line for more than a few seconds. The maneuver had no name in any tactical manual. Holloway was operating on pure instinct carved from 300 hours of low-altitude flight, where hesitation meant death. He banked hard left, the Corsair's wingtip nearly touching foam. A Zero dove from above, 20mm cannon fire stitching the water 20 yards behind him, geysers of spray marking where the rounds hit. Holloway pulled up sharply to 100 feet. The sudden climb bled airspeed but forced the Zero to adjust its diving angle. The Japanese pilot pulled out late, flashed beneath Holloway missing by less than 50 feet, and had to climb away to avoid the ocean. 2 more Zeros repositioned, coming in from opposite sides. Try to box him in, try to force him into a converging crossfire with no escape. Holloway saw them coming, saw the geometry of their attack. He did something Morrison had taught him over Kansas cornfields, something that had saved his life a dozen times when fence posts and power lines appeared where they shouldn't be. He rolled inverted, pulled through negative G, and reversed direction so violently that the airframe groaned in protest. The maneuver was brutal, unexpected, geometrically impossible to predict. The Zeros, committed to their intercept angles, shot past each other, their formations disrupted. One pilot climbed. The other broke right. For a moment, they were confused, uncertain, their coordination shattered. Holloway dropped back to 50 feet. The ocean surface was his terrain now, his advantage. He read the swells, the wind patterns, the way sunlight reflected off the water. He jinked right, following the trough of a wave, then snap-rolled left as another Zero made a gunnery pass. The thick air at sea level gave the Corsair unexpected stability. Ground effect cushioned the aircraft, reduced the need for constant trim adjustments. The Corsair's weight, a disadvantage at altitude, became an anchor here, preventing it from being thrown around by turbulence or sudden control inputs. The Zeros were struggling. At 50 feet, their speed advantage evaporated. They could not dive on him without risking a water impact. They could not turn with him at this altitude without losing sight of the horizon, without becoming disoriented, without making the kind of mistake that kills pilots in milliseconds. Holloway was flying in an environment they had never trained for, using the ocean as a wall that compressed their attack geometry into impossible angles. He throttled up, accelerated at 250 miles per hour, and flew straight for 30 seconds. 3 Zeros lined up behind him, thinking they finally had him cornered, thinking he was running out of options. Holloway waited, counted silently, watched them commit. Then he chopped throttle and deployed 15 degrees of flap. The Corsair decelerated violently, from 250 miles per hour to 180 in less than 3 seconds. The lead Zero overshot, its pilot yanking back on the stick to avoid collision, his aircraft ballooning up and away, losing energy, losing position. The second Zero broke left, reacting to the sudden deceleration with a turn that bled precious airspeed. The third pulled up hard, climbing to reposition. Holloway retracted flaps, added power, and turned inside the climbing Zero's arc. For the first time in the engagement, he had a firing solution. His gun sight, adjusted 2 degrees low for exactly the scenario, settled on the Zero's fuselage. He squeezed the trigger. 650 caliber machine guns hammered. 2,000 rounds per minute, converging at 200 yards. Tracers walked across the Zero's engine cowling and cockpit. Metal tore. Fuel ignited. Smoke poured from the Zero's engine. The aircraft rolled right, streaming fuel that caught fire in the slipstream and augured into the ocean 200 yards ahead, hitting at an angle that turned the aircraft into shrapnel. The remaining Zeros circled higher, uncertain now. American fighters did not fight like this. They did not stay low. They did not use the water as a shield. They did not survive 1-on-11 engagements. This pilot was breaking every rule, and it was working. Holloway checked his fuel gauge. Less than a quarter tank. Maybe 20 minutes before his engine quit, and he became a statistic, another name on a casualty report. He turned south, staying at 50 feet, jinking randomly, making himself an impossible target. The ocean blurred beneath him, gray and endless. The Zeros followed for 3 minutes, then broke off, unwilling to burn fuel chasing a single aircraft at wavetop level, unwilling to risk the low-altitude environment where their advantages disappeared. Holloway was alone. The flight back to Torquemada took 43 minutes. Every second felt like an hour. Holloway stayed at 50 feet until he crossed into Allied airspace, then climbed slowly to conserve fuel. His engine coughed twice, starved for gas, but kept running. The needles on his fuel gauge touched empty. He raised a tower on the radio, his voice steady despite the adrenaline crash making his hands shake. 5-7, requesting priority landing. Low fuel. The tower cleared him immediately. He brought the Corsair in on fumes, touched down hard, and rolled to stop at the end of the runway. The engine died as he turned off onto the taxiway. Ground crew ran toward Holloway's aircraft as it coasted to a stop. Sergeant Mackenzie arrived first, staring at,